Coffee Block here. I wanted to talk about a little bit about camera placement and what to do with that because a couple of things are coming up. There's one I should say that there is some really great stuff in our Facebook group, our Visual Storytellers United Facebook group, and this is part of it is the visual story course that I've been mentioning pretty often. That if you guys, with hopefully you have some free time with this Corona lockdown and you're doing something, if you want to be productive, come join us on the Visual Story course. It's totally free. I guide you through a couple lessons, and people are posting their stuff on the Facebook Visual Storytellers United Facebook group, and the stuff is so awesome. It's really, really exciting to see that, and there's a lot of good interaction there, and I'm looking at some of these things right now, and it's really cool to see people posting things and really making the best of their time and putting some effort into the work, and hopefully you get a portfolio piece out of it. But through that, some of the common things that are coming up with this is talking about camera placement. So I wanted to chat about that, and also I wanted to take your questions. So anytime you're talking about a sequence, you're going to be referencing a camera, right? And we'll get into this idea of like your viewpoint and where you should be looking in a second. But if you have any other questions, just in general about the business stuff, about storytelling, about sequences, about design when it comes to your boards, let's bring that up here. That's what these chats are for. Hopefully as a group we can talk about it and bring that together. So if you miss some of these chats for whatever reason you can't catch this live, we repost this on our Facebook page and also on YouTube, so you can subscribe there and you can see these feeds pretty regularly. Okay, so let me mention a couple of things when it comes to shot choice and camera placement, and then we'll get into your questions in a sec here. So when it comes to placing your camera, you want to make sure that that you're making the right decision for your particular shot. So let's go over this a little bit. Now, the camera is a representation of your viewpoint, and it's also where you place your audience, okay? So you're creating a sequence for viewers, and think about this. Wherever you place your camera, those are your eyeballs, right? That's where you want to be looking at any given moment. And that's also where you want the audience to be looking at any given moment, okay? So the camera is where you place your audience. So if you want something that's really intense and you want them to catch details, you want to put the camera close to the subject, all right? And in particular, when we're talking about characters and dialogue, you want to have the camera right in there. So it's pretty close, and that's why you want the audience there with that conversation, okay? That's oftentimes what you want to be doing, all right? And so with that in mind, that the camera is where you place your audience. Now, the closer you place the camera, the closer you place your audience, right, to the subject, the more they're going to be engaged with that subject. Now, the further away you place the camera from that subject, essentially the wider your shot is and the more distant your subject is. If it's really small on screen, that means your camera is really far away. That also means your audience is really far away from that subject. Now, there are places where you can use that to your advantage. A big wide establishing shot, you want the things to be wide and you want your subject to be small on screen, and that way you establish something, you let the audience look at everything, right? Because that's where you want the audience to be looking. But as soon as you establish that, you want to go in closer. This is typically what you want to be doing for a sequence. Now, every sequence is different. Every particular story scenario requires a unique solution, but I'm giving you general tips here when it comes to where you want to place your camera. So the idea is that you start out on a wide establishing shot. You place your audience there in a wide shot so they see the whole scene. They see the whole panorama. They see what's included in that scene. Even if it's an interior, you can do a wide interior shot so they know where everybody is in that particular scene. Then when people come in and they settle, you want to go in and bring your camera closer, right? So you want to bring your audience closer to that subject. And if dialogue starts up or action starts up, you want that camera really close to that action. Now, not too close, right? Not just yet, not right off the bat. You kind of want to start in wide, go into a medium wide shot or even just a medium shot, and then reestablish things closer, okay? And then what you do is you go closer still when you want emphasis and emotional beats to really read. So as the emotional intensity increases with your scene and your sequence, that's when your camera is going to start getting really, really close. So a good example of this is the famous movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly by Sergio Leone, another great Sergio, famous Italian spaghetti western director. And the big showdown and the Mexican standoff at the end with three characters, what they do is they start out on a wide shot. It's a very classic example, but it's really clear and it's really well done, and the tension starts building. And this is something you can reference, right? They start out wide and then they come in closer. You start cutting closer, and as the music increases in intensity and as the shots also get shorter and shorter, they get closer and closer to the subject, to the characters. And in the end, they're in an extreme close up on eyeballs and on, like, the hand right next to the gun. And all of those things are really cool to see in a sequence, right? So that's a really classic example. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch that movie. I think it's on Netflix. At least it's on my feed. And I mean, I have the DVD as well because I love that film. There's great composition in that movie. But you might think the pacing is a little bit slow compared to the films out today. But I feel like that sequence is like, it's got to be like 10 or 15 minutes long as they really ramp up the intensity. It's the climax. And, they have the rousing music by Enrico Morricone. And this is part of what they're doing. They're getting the camera closer, closer, and closer. The audience is closer and closer and closer to these guys, and then bam, they let off the gunfight, and that's the climax, and it's really intense. So that's the kind of thing you want to be talking about. So why am I saying this? Is because oftentimes people will do a scene or a sequence, and the camera, the shot choice and the camera is not placed for the most economical use of that emotional beat or that scene. So it'll be too wide or even too close too soon. And you want to just get it just right. And how you do this is just by feel. The default would be start out wide and keep cutting in closer and closer and closer. And then when you stay in close, for example, in a dialogue scene, you could do over the shoulder shots and you just go from one head to another head, over the shoulder. But then you stay in close to that dialogue. And don't pull out to reestablish if you don't have to. The reason I say that is because oftentimes people will just, artists will pull the camera out just because they feel like they want to have some shot variety. But when the intensity is on the actors and the characters who are giving their dialogue or doing their action, imagine like a kung fu fight, you don't necessarily want to pull wide unless there's a new element being introduced, like a new danger or a new weapon or a new character who comes in there. That's when you want to pull out wide and do something different, okay? So if you guys have any other tips for this, let me know. There's always some good interaction back and forth here on the feed. And any questions about that, of course, I'll do my best to kind of give you my opinion on stuff. There is no right way to do it. It really, there's a million different ways to solve story problems and where you can place the camera. So think of another thing when you're doing your sequences. A lot of times people will put the camera and it's just a standard medium shot that's eye level. Also remember, you can place the camera up high and you can place the camera down low. In fact, you want to be doing that to give a subjective emotional weight to your subject. So if your camera's up high looking down on somebody, think about how that makes you feel. If you're up high and you're looking down over somebody, you're towering over them, it makes you feel superior. The audience would be superior to the subject, and the subject's going to feel inferior, right? It's going to feel smaller, right? Think about if you're shooting Superman or something. He's this big superhero. You're going to bring the camera down low so he looks big and ominous and imposing, and he's like a big hero, right? Or a bad guy, right? He's scary, right? You bring the camera down low and you're looking up at somebody just as you would, like, the average basketball player is a lot taller than I am, for example. And so I'd be looking up at them and they're big and giant, okay? So that is, that's a funny thing. Have you ever met a real NFL player or a professional basketball player, like somebody in the NBA. And I mean, if you're not like 6 feet yourself, those guys are enormous. They're just huge and wide. They're giant, and it's really funny because they don't look that way on screen, but when you actually get down on the field and you're right up next to these guys, they're huge. They're like trees. So then think about that, how you're looking up at these guys, uh, and how that makes you feel, right? They're bigger than you, they're taller than you, that kind of thing. So it's the same thing with the camera, and that gives an emotional weight. And so don't forget that. Don't just put it like eye level just because it's the default thing. You want to make a choice and put that emotional weight on your subject. So just remember, wide, medium, close. Those are your kind of three default choices that you have for a shot. It's wide, or it's medium, or it's close. You can put the camera up high, you can put the camera low, or you can put the camera level with the subject. Those three choices. Now, the one I use the least is putting the camera level with the subject. I'll usually try and find a way to give like a subjective meaning to the camera height. And you can go back and forth. So one character can be higher than the other throughout the whole scene. And then when there's an emotional reveal, you can have one character who was lower actually get up. Maybe they get up out of their seat, and they grow taller, uh, like physically on screen versus the other character. So now you shifted that emotional weight visually. Okay, these are things that you can control by using the camera and the shots. So that's really important. So anyway, hopefully that makes some sense when it comes to doing your storyboards. So let me take a look, and let me give a shout out to these people. All right, hey Chad, good to see you again, buddy. And Tim, great to see you too. A couple of my mentorship alums. Some people were asking about that mentorship too. They're like, "Oh, what are you always talking about the mentorship?" So that was a that was a group that we led back in 2018, and it was the first time we did such an elaborate course. And again, I'm still super inspired about how what people did, and the results that we came up with. And even now we're seeing people update their portfolios, and I love seeing the updates. So that's great. So it was basically it was a guided course with a private group of people, and it was a year long, giving them some story exercises and really kind of portfolio focused stuff. So now what we've created, which I really love, is kind of a mini network, and hopefully we can stay in touch and give some updates. So those are my boys from the mentorship. Big shout out to you guys. um, so I love it. Hey Joe, what's up, man? How are you? I love your comment. Let me just read that for everybody. Is you met Joey Browner, Vikings player from the 1980s. His hands, when I shook them, are like baseball mitts. Yeah, of course. It's really funny. I mean, the average person, like I'm 5'10". I consider myself pretty average. Neither tall nor neither that short. But yeah, it's like when you meet some of these athletes, or like I worked in Europe for a while, and I would meet like these Northern European guys, and they were all like basketball players too, like these tall blonde Vikings were were just huge, and it was kind of funny for me to hang out with them, and just the difference that I don't see that as often where I was from in California. There's a little bit more variety of heights. So that again, remember, it's like it's your subjective viewpoint is where your camera is, and you want to use that to your advantage because it affects the emotional beat in your scene and of your shot. Okay, now you can also have a short person look superior if you lower the camera and you point up at them, right? Think about that, how you can flip things on its head. I love seeing that. I actually really enjoy when people change things up like that, right? um, yeah, thanks, Chad. This is a great comment. Let me just read this for everybody too. So, Chad Prickle here writes, I always view it in terms of what kind of story do the other elements in the scene serve the purpose, and what kind of interactions they're doing with the staging. If there's a lot of movement, you may want to pull out to see it, and any close-ups could be used in relation to dirty shots that give an impact of tension, etc. So, and then he's calling out some films here like rotations between Batman, Commissioner Gordon, and Harvey in the Dark Knight, where the camera rotates around all three as they're talking. So that's yeah, that's cool. And then Abby here says, Um, he likes Spielberg's constant low camera shots on ET to make the audience feel like children. So yeah, keep looking at these things in the films and keep observing how filmmakers are using this stuff, um, because you want to put this in your own work. And when we're doing storyboards, we're using the drawing tools as a means of communication, and the camera height is how you do that. Now, let's talk about technical terms. When I say camera height and placing up high versus low, how do you do that? The way to do that is using perspective. Your camera height is where your horizon line is, right? That's where you get to use your perspective. Okay. So same thing. So if you have the horizon line up high, that means you as an audience member and as a viewer, and the camera is placed high looking down on something. You bring that horizon down low, the camera's low, and you're looking up at the subject matter. So that's how you manipulate things with your perspective. And so that's why I really emphasize, I'm sure you guys have heard me say this often, is that you really have to know your perspective when it comes to doing storyboards. So now you can do a shorthand for perspective, but it is still really important that you understand the importance of the horizon line, which is your camera height, which is the viewing height of your audience. Okay. So that's all really good. So let me see what questions we have here in Instagram. All right, big shout out to you guys. Thanks for joining today. Okay, so Distract is asking, what's your thought on having storyboards printed out and pinned up on a wall versus having the storyboards as a whole on a computer? That's a good question. So the trend nowadays is to do everything digital. It really is. It's very rare that I print anything out anymore. Most of the times I'm beaming my images to the client or the producer, director, who's ever on there, and it's in digital format, and they can scroll through it with their computer, basically with their arrow keys. It's the reason you do that is faster. It's just easier to beam things, email things. You can put it on Dropbox. 2D images are pretty low tech. They don't take that much space. You can compress them pretty easily, even Photoshop files. They just don't get that heavy. Even at 4K, which is resolution size, it's still not even that big compared to like 3D animation or moving video. So printing out something and having it like up on the wall to see, it's usually if you're doing some kind of special pitch. I only see that if, or rarely. The reasons I would have done that would be like an advertising pitch or some kind of boardroom where I have to pitch to people, and you actually print it out. But nowadays, what you do, even in a conference room, you just plug in your computer or you upload your files to the network, and you're up on screen. They usually have a big screen there. You could just with your computer, you just do it digitally and you scroll through your images. So it's really unnecessary to print things out anymore. Plus, it's slow. It takes up paper. You want to save some trees, all that stuff. So yeah, I recommend you keep it digital. That's the trend in the industry. So you might as well follow the trend and be on top of things. You don't want to be like so much in the dark ages. Even though I love to do things on paper, that it becomes difficult for you to send stuff. Even still, they're probably going to ask you to take pictures of whatever you do on paper and email it to somebody. It's always going to be in a digital format some way, right? So yeah. Okay, Abby has another question here, which is great. When it comes to boards, any tips on mastering drawing technique for certain types of camera lenses? Yeah, so this is where perspective comes into play. So, drawing techniques for different camera lenses. Now, let me just give a little explanation for those who may not understand what we're talking about here. Is you not only are you going to have a choice of where you place your camera, you also have a choice on your camera what kind of lens you use. I think most of you guys are familiar with kind of point and shoot cameras that you can change lenses on. Now, you don't have to get so technical. I recommend you kind of understand this stuff because it's important to cinematography and filmmaking and storytelling in general. But that you have wide angle lenses and you have long angle lenses. A telephoto lens will essentially compress visual space, and things way off in the distance will actually look like they're very close up. Okay, wide angle lenses, pretty much how it sounds. You get a wide angle view. So think of like your fisheye lens, or just usually your camera phone will have a wide angle on it. And yeah, so that kind of lens on like an iPhone or something would usually have a wide angle lens, so it can grab a lot of view area. And then you want to, so basically you want to document those two choices. And you can go really technical and like do a 45 millimeter lens versus a 120 millimeter lens. And I recommend you guys investigate that. I think there's some lens information up on our website, Storyboard Art. But anyway, I want to answer your question here. So when it comes to drawing techniques, you want to use your perspective. So your horizon line is where your camera height is, and then where your vanishing points are, whether they're close together or they're further apart, is going to determine your lens choice. Okay, so let me say that again. So you have a horizon line, you have vanishing points on your horizon line. If the vanishing points are placed closer together in your picture, in your composition, you're going to have a wide angle lens. Things are going to look distorted because that's how the grid on your perspective is going to look. Now, if your vanishing points are further apart, which is kind of like the normal way of like the way your eye views things, which is like a 50 millimeter lens, kind of the average viewport, that means your vanishing points are pretty far apart. And that's where you have a long telephoto effect. And that means the grid will actually look very flat, right? It won't have as much of a like an extreme depth to it. So just remember that how you place your vanishing points, either close together or further apart, will determine your lens choice. And it can get really technical to this, but that's kind of the basics of it, right? So hopefully that makes some sense. All right. So let me go back to Instagram here and pull up some recent questions. All right. Cool. That's a great question here from Alan94544. When do you make a detailed storyboard versus a more simplified one? I've seen an example of both. Yeah, of course. I think the question there, the answer to that question is basically what is the purpose of that storyboard panel? Think about it. If you do a really detailed storyboard, it's going to take you longer. If you do a simplified storyboard, it's going to take you less time, theoretically, right? Sometimes to get to a simple storyboard can actually take a long time because you got to do a lot of thinking and roughs to actually simplify things in a cool way. But if you have a lot of complex detail and rendering and shading and light and shadow and stuff in a storyboard, that's usually because you're doing something really detailed and it's for a specific purpose. So storyboards that have a lot of detail, that look like concept boards that are very tight and cleaned up and have many passes, they almost look like illustrations. That's usually for, traditionally it's been for live action film or advertising, where you're conceptualizing ideas and the ideas have to be really developed and detailed. And that's probably depending on the taste of the director, the producer that's on that particular project. Simplified storyboards, which have to be churned out really, really quickly, has traditionally been for use in animation and maybe visual effects. I've done a lot of that just because I kind of come from the animation world. So you have to pump out a ton of continuity boards and a ton of footage, and you end up having to simplify your storyboards and just crank them out as fast as possible. So instead of doing, let's say, 10 storyboard panels a day, you're going to end up doing 50 storyboard panels a day. So obviously, because of that, you have the same hours in a day, but you just have to crank out more panels. You're going to have to reduce the amount of detail in those storyboards. And that's kind of what you want, depending on the subject matter. So I always say you should be able to do both. You should be able to render up your storyboards fully if that's required of you. You should also have a nice and clear, simplified style with interesting and good solid silhouettes and shortcuts when it comes to your storyboard panels. So you should be able to do both, depending on what it is. I would always ask, of course, when you get a job, when you get a new job, you get a new client, or whatever studio you're working for, ask them the level of finish that they're looking for. And this is where you can educate them too. If they want something super tight and rendered and really polished, let them know how long it's going to take you to do that, and be honest, right? because I know it takes me a long time to polish something up. So like I'm saying, I might only be able to do 5 storyboard panels the whole day. And you think about it, you got 8 hours a day. That might be 1 to 2 hours a panel, and that's actually quite fast. Some people, you can spend 5, 6 hours on one illustration if you really sit down to it. So, so you want to ask to make sure what kind of level of finish you're getting into. Okay. So cool. Let me get to some of this. There's great interaction. Thank you guys for participating in this. Let me get to a couple more questions here, and see what we got here. This is a great comment here by Jason. Jason Confessor here. While watching good films, do you see a lot of mistakes when it comes to camera angles or camera placements that could have been better? Not really, to be honest, because every film has a unique style. So when you say mistakes, that's kind of a loaded term. I wouldn't necessarily call it a mistake as to where they place the camera. I would usually say that maybe as my own sensibilities, I might do something different as to what I'm watching. But most of the time, actually, in a pretty high quality, big budget, either TV show or movie, the choices that they're making on screen as to where they place their camera is has been gone over many times, and it's usually based on the style of the movie. So you might disagree with where they place the camera to see the dinosaur coming at you or to see that big robot or the battle. But I think mainly what people comment on, or at least what I comment on, is not necessarily the shot choice within the scene, but just the reasons for the choices that the characters are making that makes a good story or not. Now, camera placement does help. That's why if you watch a Spielberg film, very rarely you complain about the technique of that film, right? Because it's so beautifully executed, right? It's such high quality craftsmanship from everybody on that production is usually churning out a really high quality product. So then it's the next level type of critique where you might critique the story in general, like you're talking about, why a character does something versus another. I think when you say like mistakes or things that you might, things that could have been better, that's where you see like a movie that you don't like kind of a crappy movie or maybe a lower budget film that you say, geez, why did they put the camera there? Why didn't they do this? Or you might get a jump cut. And that's, could be any number of reasons, or they ran out of money, or they actually weren't that creative when it came to doing the sequence. They ran out of time. Any one of those things could have happened. That happens a lot on productions, even big Hollywood films. So most of the time, what you do get is there's so many technicians and craftsmen working on a film that by the time it gets into the hands of these people, it's usually in pretty good hands. And then really what you want to be, normally what I comment on is not necessarily the camera choice. It's mainly the subject matter. That's not to say I love analyzing films, and I like to see the different styles. So I can't think of one in particular, but I think that's something to pay attention to. You might be watching a chase sequence, for example, and it may not be that exciting for you. So then you have to ask, okay, why? Why is it not exciting? Is the camera just really boring? Is it really wide shots? Is it really monotonous? The pacing? There could be many things. It's not always the camera placement, but you really want to be pushing and making things as exciting as possible there, right? Cool. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, and I wasn't like confusing you with my with my answer there. Yeah, I love it. There's some really good discussion here in the comments. So yeah, one thing. This is great. I love your comments here, Abby. This is like a couple of things that I think could possibly be overused. And you mentioned it, is like bird's eye view and kind of like map shots, which is, some people have used that term. You do like a big overhead view looking down on something. You look down on the scene, and that particular viewpoint is kind of the easy way out. I always, it's kind of the default. Yes, it works. Yeah, it serves the purpose. But can you do a more interesting wide shot, maybe not bring the camera up so high. That's something I comment a lot on people's sequences when I see them and like students and stuff, is because they just like rail that camera way up high, and it's like on this hot air balloon looking down, or like a helicopter shot, and it's so wide, and it's like you see the whole landscape, and sometimes you don't need to, right? And so I'm using an extreme example here, but if you want to pull out, just pull out enough to just get a reestablishment of the scene, but you don't have to pull out wide into outer space and then you see everything and then you come back in, because it's going to be jarring. Especially, like I said, I avoid doing that when I'm locked into a dialogue sequence. So when the characters come into the room, I'll do an establishing shot. As soon as they start talking, I'll just start playing with staging, but I'll keep the camera pretty close to the characters, and I'll only reestablish and show wide shots when I really need to. So yeah, think about that, since it's really interesting and important. So cool. I think on that note, this is probably a good place to end this one. So thanks for the great discussion here. And if you guys have any more questions about it, feel free to hit us up, and you can see the replay again on YouTube or on Facebook. So leave your comments there, and let's keep the discussion going. All right. Thanks, fellas. Thanks for hanging out. Okay. Have a great evening. See ya.